Okay, so in chapter 6, this is where we're going to start factoring, and most of what we're going to do from this point forward will involve some type of factoring, whether we're solving quadratic equations or simplifying rational expressions and equations. It will involve factoring. Now, one of the things that you have to do from last semester is to be able to multiply polynomial by monomial. Now, before we do that, let's kind of review actually a property from last semester, and this was in a chapter called Exponents. And that property is called the product rule for exponents. So let's kind of review the product rule for exponents. So product rule for exponents. All right, and so the rule basically said this, and I'm going to use the same letters, same alphabet, same variables as they did in the book. So it said that if you have a to the m power times a to the n power, and notice that these bases are the same, so the base here is a, the base here is a. So basically, in words, if you multiply like bases, then you're going to add exponents. So then this is going to become a to the m plus n. All right, so for example, let's say you had x cubed times x squared. Then based on the product rule for exponents, since I'm multiplying like bases, I'm going to add these exponents, so that'll be x to the 5th power. So don't multiply the exponents, you add the exponents. And then another thing we need to review that's going to be needed for this part is this. So let's multiply. Let's say we had negative 3 x squared y times, let's say, 4 x y to the 5th. So let's just say we had that. Oops, sorry. Right here. So negative 3x squared y times 4x to the 5th. All right, so notice I'm multiplying. You can think of these as two monomials. The coefficient here is a negative 3, and the coefficient here is 4. So I'm saying negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. So that's what I get when I multiply the coefficients. Now let's use the product rule. Let's use a product rule with this. So if you look, this base is x, this base is x. Now remember, if there's no exponent there, right here, it's understood to be a 1. So that's understood to be a 1. So when I multiply like bases, based on the product rule for exponents, I add these exponents. So this 2 plus this 1 is 3. So I'm going to get x to the 3rd power. So x squared times x to the 1st is x cubed. Now y, I have y to the 1st here times y to the 5th here. When I multiply like bases, I'm going to add exponents. So 1 plus 5 is 6. So then when I multiply these two monomials together, I get this expression. I get negative 12 x cubed y to the 6th. Okay? All right, so now we can go and kind of do some examples with these. Now, once we go do these examples, you're going to be assigned a worksheet that is to be turned in based on this. So these are prerequisites from last semester, but those are needed as we move forward into chapter 6. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples. So let's suppose we had, in the directions will say multiply. All right, multiply. So the directions will say multiply. So example 1, let's suppose we had 3 times 3x squared y minus 4x plus 2. So let's suppose we had that. All right, now I want to multiply this polynomial. Remember, poly means many, so many monomials. So there are 3 monomials here, 3 terms. 1, 2, 3. Now remember, this term right here, that's a negative 4x. So it's not 4x, it's a negative 4x. Remember, you can think of subtraction as adding the opposite. All right, so to multiply this, you're basically going to use the distributive property. So every term in here, you're going to multiply by 3. So I'm going to get 3 times 3x squared y is 9x squared y. 3 times a negative 4x is a negative 12x. And then 3 times 2 is 6. So that's your answer. There are no like terms, so you can't combine anything. These are all different terms. All right, number 2. You have negative, let's say 6x times, let's say we had 3y minus 5x. So negative 6x times 3y minus 5x. So again, we're going to multiply this polynomial by this monomial, and to do that, you're going to use the distributive property to do that. And so for some of you, you may want to write this step out. It's up to you. Some of you can do this in your head. Some of you may need to actually write it out. But basically, you're saying this: negative 6x times 3y. Now remember, I'm going to go ahead and write this as plus a negative. So remember, you can always plus the opposite. You can always change subtraction to addition by adding the opposite. So I'm going to say negative 6x, so plus a negative 6x times a negative 5x. All right. So now that kind of looks like this right here, this example we did earlier. So negative 6x times a positive 3y is a negative 18xy. It does not matter in what order you put the variables. So remember, multiplication is commutative. So if you want to say negative 18yx or negative 18xy, does not matter, but normally we put them in alphabetical order. And always make sure you put the coefficient in front. Coefficient should always be in front. And then a negative, remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. So 6x times a negative 6x times a negative 5x is going to be a positive 30. All right, now remember, this is x times x. So x times x, when you multiply like bases, you add exponents. So this becomes x squared. So this becomes 30x squared. And that's your answer. Okay? Now, on the worksheet, all I want in the blank is the answer. So make sure that's the answer. Don't put this. You can do this on the back of the worksheet for your own information. But this is the answer I want. So anything if it just says show answer, if it doesn't say anything about the work, then just put the answer down there. Okay, but this is the answer I want. Make sure that's what you put in the blank. Don't put anything else, because then it becomes more time consuming to grade. Okay? All right, let's look at another example. All right, this is going to be example number 3. All right, suppose we had 2x squared y times, that's 2x squared y times 5xy cubed minus 7x minus, let's say, 4. All right, so 2x squared y times 5xy cubed minus 7x minus 4. All right, so again, we're multiplying a polynomial by a monomial. So you distribute. And again, if you need to, if you have to do this step, it's up to you. You don't have to. But if you do this step, you're saying 2x squared y times 5xy cubed. So this terms be multiplied by this. In fact, every term in here is being multiplied by this. All right, so we get plus, I'm just going to put this as plus right now. So plus a 2x squared y times a negative 7x plus 2x squared y times a negative 4. Okay, times a negative 4. All right. Now, let's go to the first one, right here. Multiply the coefficients. Remember, multiplying these two monomials together. Multiply the coefficients. 2 times 5 is 10. X squared times x. Remember, multiply like bases, you add exponents. That's a 2. That's a 1 right here for x. That's a 1. So I get x cubed. Y to the first times y cubed is y to the fourth. So when you multiply like bases, you add exponents. So that's what this becomes. So this becomes 10 x cubed y to the fourth. Now let's look at this one right here. So you need to write your answer in a particular order or in a particular way. So see how you have a positive times a negative times a negative. So remember, a positive times a negative is a negative. So you're going to say subtract. So don't say plus a negative, just say subtract. That's how we want the terms listed. But 2 times 7 is 14. X squared times x is x cubed. Okay. Now, see this y right here? There's no y here. So y times, if you want to think of this as times 1, I guess, you could just say that's just y. All right? There's nothing there. All right? Now over here, you're going to say a positive 2 times a negative 4 is a negative 8. And then there's no variables here. So all you do is just bring this down. So that's just x squared y. Now, if you look at this, none of these terms are like terms, so you can't combine them. Leave them alone. Remember, like terms are terms that have the same variables. So you may say, all right, well, all of these terms have the same variables. All of them have xy, all of them have xy, all of them xy. Yeah, but they have the same variables, and each variable is being raised to the exact same powers. And each variable is raised to the same power. All right, now what I mean by that is see, let's look at the x's. See how this x is being raised to the third power, this x is being raised to the third power, but this x is being raised to the second power. So do all three terms have the same x raised to the same power? The answer is no. All right, now if you look at the y's, this is y to the fourth, this is y, and this is y. So the y's are different. But here's the way you need to determine if they're like terms. See how this term is x cubed y to the fourth? Are there any other term that has x cubed y to the fourth? The answer is no. See how this term is x cubed y? Are there any other term that has only x cubed y? Nope. See how this term is x squared y? Are there any other term that has x squared y? The answer is no. So none of these are like terms. You cannot combine them. So that's the answer. That's the answer you would put in the blank. All right, let's look at this one. We'll do one more, and then you'll be ready, I think. Let's see. And then you'll be ready to, well, actually we'll do two more, and then after that you'll be ready to complete that worksheet. So let's look at number 4. Let's suppose we had negative 3x to the fourth times 5x squared minus 6x plus 2. Let's suppose we had that. All right, so negative 3x to the fourth times 5x squared minus 6x plus 2. So again, we're multiplying this polynomial by this monomial. So you can use the distributive property. And again, if you need to write in that second step, go ahead and do so. So you're saying this term times this this term here, this polynomial, this monomial. So negative 3x to the fourth times 5x squared plus a negative 3x to the fourth, negative 3x to the fourth times a negative 6x. So be careful, that's a negative 6x. That's what that term is. It's not a positive 6x, it's a negative 6x. And then plus a negative 3x to the fourth times, and this is a positive 2. All right, and so we just multiply monomials. The coefficients, a negative 3 times a positive 5 is a negative 15. X to the fourth times x squared is x to the 6. Over here, now remember, a negative times a negative is a positive, so a negative 3 times a negative 6 is a positive 18. X to the fourth times x to the first is x to the fifth. So when you multiply like bases, you add exponents. Remember, this is understood to be a 1 right here for x to the first. And then finally, a negative 3 times a positive 2 is a negative 6. So you're going to write a subtraction. And then the only thing you have left is that x to the fourth. And those are not like terms. None of these terms have the same variable x raised to the same power. So this is your answer. All right, and then finally number 5. Let's look at this. We have negative 2m to the fifth times n to the second power times 3mn. Oops, sorry. Okay, so negative 2m to the fifth n squared times 3mn minus 6m, let's say, plus 4n minus 1. Let's say we had that. All right, so negative, so remember we're going to multiply this polynomial, which has 4 terms in it, by this monomial. So basically you're saying this, each of these multiplied by that monomial. And again, if you have to put in that second step, you put in that second step. It does not matter. So you're going to say negative 2m to the fifth n squared times 3mn plus a negative 2m to the fifth n squared times a negative 6m plus a negative 2m to the fifth n squared times a positive 4n plus, and then negative 2, I'm running out of space, m to the fifth n squared times a negative 1. Okay, so times a negative 1. All right, so let's do this one first. Okay, so a negative 2 times a positive 3 is a negative 6. M to the fifth times m, so the product rule for exponents. So when you multiply like bases, you add exponents. 5 plus 1 is 6, so that becomes m to the 6. N squared times n to the first is n cubed. So that's what this becomes. That's an n right here. It's n cubed. Over here, I have a negative 2 times a negative 6 is a positive 12, so it becomes plus 12. All right, m to the fifth times m is m to the 6. And then n squared, there's no n in this term, so it just becomes n squared. All right, so that's what this becomes. So this right here is this. All right, over here, a negative 2 times a positive 4, negative 2 times a positive 4 is a negative 8. So we're going to have a subtract 8. M to the fifth, there's no m's here, so that stays m to the fifth. All right, m to the fifth. Let's see, right here. M to the fifth. Okay, so that stays m to the fifth. All right, and then n squared times n to the first is n cubed. All right, so that takes care of this right here. Now over here, a negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 3. So negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 3. And then m to the 5th times n squared, there's no variables here, so that just becomes m to the 5th n squared. And notice none of these terms are alike. None of them are alike. So that's your answer right here. So that's what you would put in the blank. Okay? All right, so now you are ready to begin. Let's see, you're ready to begin. We'll start section 6.1, part A, and it's on Canvas. All right, so section 6.1, part A on Canvas, or the worksheet. All right.